You know, in our day, there are hundreds and thousands of philosophies and religions out there, all kinds of cults: Mormonism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, JWs, countless others. They're all self-made religions of armchair theologians who abandon God to fit their own ideals and means of salvation that they suppose will guarantee their safe entrance into heaven. But there's only one message that will. So all of those religions and all those philosophies represent wasted effort, and wasted effort in a hopeless cause. Know this about religion apart from Christ: a hopeless cause. Wasted effort in a hopeless cause. Part of the reason for that is God has designed it that way. Notice in this passage, in verse 21, a little phrase that's there, really interesting. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God. In the wisdom of God, God has so devised this matter of salvation that there's only one way. That God has shut the door to every other avenue of salvation. On the broad road that leads to destruction, there's a lot of people that are thinking they're headed in the right direction. The signs are out there and they're saying this way to heaven. And they're believing it. But God has shut the door on every other avenue except one. God in His wisdom has done that. God in His wisdom has made it so there is only one way of salvation, and that way of salvation is Christ. John 14:6, you know the passage. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. Or Acts 4:12, Peter declaimed, there is no other name under heaven by which men must be saved, other than that of Christ. God in His wisdom has so made this matter of salvation that Christ alone will be glorified in it. In fact, salvation is all about Christ. It's by Christ, it's through Christ, and it's for Christ. This is one of the challenges we have today in the modern church. We talk about salvation, but it's as if there's some kind of salvation that's out there that is worth anything apart from Christ. No, we're saved under Christ. It's all about Him. He's the one that accomplishes it. When you enter into salvation, it's all about a life with Him. And one day when you're in heaven, heaven will be all about Christ. Salvation is about Christ. There's no salvation apart from Him. And God has designed it that way. In fact, all creation is by Him, through Him, and for Him. And certainly the case as well with salvation. Every other religious system is a hopeless cause. And it matters not how zealous the person might be. Paul spoke of his fellow Jews who had a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. Romans 10:2. In other words, they were extremely zealous in their religion, but they weren't well informed. And they didn't realize that Christ was the Messiah, and they didn't place their faith in Him. And because of that, they were engaged in a hopeless cause. And you think about the cults in our world today, and the zeal that is applied in some cases in man's self-effort to save himself. And what a tragedy it is. You think about the Jehovah's Witnesses, to pick on one cult, and all their efforts to go door to door and speak about a religion that exempts Christ. What a wasted time and effort it is in a hopeless cause. And you could go down the list and talk about all the cults that way. You know, a person can have a religious profession and a religious practice and be lost. Did you know that? A person can practice religion. They can even say the right things and be absolutely lost. It's important to make that point, I think. In Matthew chapter 7, turn there in verses 21 down through verse 23. And just again to make this point that religion in and of itself, apart from Christ, is wasted effort and a hopeless cause. And I think this passage expresses that very strongly. In this whole passage, Christ is talking about those false professors who make some profession of faith in God, and yet they're not truly saved. But in verse 21, he speaks specifically to a group of people. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. You know, this is an amazing passage because you notice a couple things here about these people. He's not talking about the people we would suppose to be lost people. He's talking about religious people. And these religious people have a religious profession. They cry out to Jesus what? Lord, Lord. They acknowledge him to be Lord. You say, well, that sounds really good. That's pretty impressive. They have an idea about Jesus that he's Lord. But it's not just that. They got a religious practice. Do you see that there? So much so that in his name they're doing what? Prophesying. In their name of casting out demons. And in his name performing miracles. Got a religious profession and also a religious practice. And yet they're what? They're lost. They're lost. You say, well, how can that be? Well, the answer is given in the last part there. I will declare to them, verse 23, I never knew you. So it doesn't matter what the religion or philosophy it is. If it's not about Christ, and it's not to the gospel, it's wasted effort and a hopeless cause. We need to understand that there's only one way that you're going to get safely from earth, where you stand today, to heaven. There's only one way. There's only one source of power that can do what's needful to get you from where you are now to heaven one day. And all the other things that are represented in salvation. And it's through Christ and it's through his gospel. Somebody has written this little story about a man who fell into a pit and he couldn't get out. And so some came along to offer their help. Buddha said, your pit is only a state of mind. A Hindu said, this pit is for your purging and making you more perfect. Confucius said, if you would have listened to me, you would have never fallen into that pit. New Ager said, maybe you should network with some other pit dwellers. A self-pitying person said, you haven't seen anything until you've seen my pit. A news reporter said, could I have the exclusive story on your pit? Federal bureaucrat said, have you paid your taxes on your pit? County inspector said, you have a permit for that pit. A realist said, that's a pit. An idealist said, the world shouldn't have pits. An optimist said, things could be worse. A pessimist said, things will get worse. So Jesus, seeing the man, took him by the hand and lifted him out of the pit. Kind of a humorous story that gets us back to the second part of our message, and that is the power of the gospel. And notice here in this passage that regardless of what men think, and the cross, the word of the cross is to Jews a stumbling block, Greeks foolishness. What God says about it, what the word says about it, what is true about it is the power of God and wisdom of God in the salvation. And Christ is that exclusively. There is no other way. Paul spoke in Romans 1:16 of this same thing when he said, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, the good news. For it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. What a great statement that is. The power, the dunamis of God. We think of great displays of power. You know, I got a 9-volt battery and my microphone makes the mic work. Go from there. I used to work in a nuclear power plant. Thousands of megawatts of power represented there. You think about the power of the sun. I don't know how many that is. It's a lot of power that's there. It goes on day by day as God's grace provides us heat and sunlight and all that sort of thing. You can have all the power of the sun and not have the power to accomplish what the power of the gospel can accomplish. The dunamis of God. You know, it's related to our term